For years, the world watched a royal story unfold like a slow-motion train wreck. Whispers of betrayal, glimmers of rebellion, and the unspoken question of how far a family would go to protect its legacy. But then it happened. No press conference, no televised speech, no official warning. Just a quiet click on a website deep inside Buckingham Palace. And centuries of royal formality shattered in seconds. The headlines made it sound simple. King Charles removed Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's royal titles. But this wasn't a routine update. It was a declaration, the Crown's way of saying, enough is enough. For 3 years, the couple had lived between two worlds, half royal, half Hollywood. And for a while, it seemed like they could juggle both, until the palace decided to remind everyone who the chosen ones really were. Imagine the scene inside Buckingham Palace that day. The corridors silent, the staff tense, screens flickering, as a single web editor pressed save. In that moment, His Royal Highness became just Harry. Her Royal Highness became simply Meghan. No announcement, no ceremony, only a digital erasure, cleaner and colder than any royal exile in history. The world gasped, but inside the palace walls, there was a strange calm. This wasn't revenge, it was restoration. After years of headlines and interviews that painted the monarchy as fragile and outdated, the king had drawn a line that even his mother, Queen Elizabeth, had hesitated to draw. Pause. Be patient with yourself, calm down, and forgive yourself. But this story isn't as straightforward as a father punishing his son. It's about loyalty, legacy, and what happens when the people born to rule start breaking their own rules. The crown didn't just remove titles that day. It reclaimed control. And behind that quiet act, an entire network of royal insiders, advisors, and heirs had been maneuvering for months, waiting for the moment when the palace would finally bite back. And here's the thing. This was no sudden outburst. It was the last move in a long strategic game. Because deep down, Charles knew this decision would echo far beyond family. It would redefine what being royal actually meant. So how did it come to this? What finally pushed the king to cut off his own bloodline? To find the answer, we have to rewind. Not to a throne room or a press interview, but to a private meeting years earlier, when the crown's patience first began to crack. The moment it happened, almost no one noticed. No photographers outside the gates. No breaking news crawl across television screens. Just a subtle edit on the royal family's official website. One moment, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex sat neatly listed beside the rest of the chosen ones. The next, their titles were gone. For an institution that thrives on spectacle, the silence was deafening. Royal watchers described it as a digital guillotine, swift, silent, final. And that was precisely the point. The monarchy had learned something painful over the past few years. Every public explanation only fed the fire. This time, there would be no explanations, just action. Behind those palace walls, Charles's private secretary delivered the final approval like a sealed verdict. Staff members were instructed not to discuss it. Even senior aides learned of it only when the website refreshed. It was an execution carried out with the precision of tradition and the coldness of necessity. The message was unmistakable. The crown had taken back control. For 3 years, Harry and Meghan had tried to exist in a gray area, attending celebrity events while keeping royal titles, criticizing the institution while benefiting from its prestige. But the monarchy doesn't do gray. To the palace, it was like leaving a door open for intruders. And now, That door had finally slammed shut. It wasn't personal, at least not on the surface. Insiders whispered that Charles acted not out of anger, but to protect the foundation his mother had spent 70 years building. Every headline, every podcast jab, every documentary confession had been another crack in the marble. Something had to give, and yet there was an unmistakable irony in how it was done. The king, who once promised transparency, chose secrecy. The father, who longed for reconciliation, responded with silence. But in the royal world, silence often speaks louder than words. Outside, the public reaction was instant and divided. Some praised the king's decisiveness, calling it long overdue. Others accused him of cruelty, of abandoning his son to appease the tabloids. But inside the palace, there was only relief. Order, at last, restored, even if just for a moment. Still, that peace came with a shadow, because the decision everyone saw online was only the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. The tension between the crown and the exiles hadn't begun with a web update. It had been building for years, quietly poisoning every family interaction and public appearance. And if you follow those cracks back far enough, you find where the real story begins. In the uneasy years after Megxit, when the Sussexes tried to balance Hollywood's spotlight with royal duty. To understand the king's silent strike, you have to go back to when the palace still believed reconciliation was possible. In the months after Harry and Meghan stepped away, officials tried to maintain a delicate peace. One foot in royal service, one in California sunshine. For a time, it worked. The couple remained globally popular, and the family avoided open warfare. But slowly, the walls started to crumble. Every interview, every documentary, every veiled remark about the firm chipped away at trust. The monarchy's chosen ones felt betrayed, not because Harry and Meghan had left, but because they kept talking after they did. What might have been a quiet exit turned into a worldwide spectacle. Inside Buckingham Palace, aides started referring to the Sussex problem as the California question. How do you handle a couple who reject royal duty but still carry royal influence? There was no precedent. The Queen had weathered scandals before, but this was different. Social media amplified every whisper, turning private frustrations into global debates. The turning point came during the release of their Netflix docuseries. For the palace, it wasn't just the content, it was the tone. Defensive, emotional, sometimes mocking. To viewers, it felt like a confession. To the crown, it felt like provocation. Behind closed doors, senior courtiers warned Charles that if he didn't draw a boundary soon, the monarchy itself might look powerless. And so year after year, tension thickened. When Harry's memoir hit shelves, it was seen as another betrayal. When Meghan appeared at high-profile events using her Duchess title, the palace bristled. The question wasn't if something would happen, it was when. By the time whispers of the chosen ones reclaiming authority began circulating, the king's patience had all but evaporated. His advisors knew he couldn't afford another scandal, not with his reign still young and fragile. Every move Harry and Meghan made seemed to test that fragility, intentionally or not. Still, Charles hesitated. Family, after all, is family. He'd seen his mother choose duty over love, and he'd sworn he wouldn't repeat that history. But as the headlines piled up, he started realizing something uncomfortable. Maybe love was the very thing blinding him to duty. And so, as the world debated their every move, inside the palace, plans began forming. Quietly, carefully. The idea of removing the titles wasn't new. It had been floating for months. But until now, no one had dared to act. That would change when one document landed on the king's desk. A small piece of paper that transformed years of frustration into a royal reckoning. That paper didn't look like much. Just another set of filings. Another day's stack on the king's crowded desk. But inside Buckingham Palace, it would become the fuse that finally set off the explosion. The document showed something that senior aides had long warned about. Meghan's Duchess title appearing again in a fresh business registration. It might have seemed harmless to anyone else, but to the palace, it broke an old promise. Years earlier, during that tense meeting with the late Queen, Meghan had reportedly vowed never to blend royalty with business. She had promised to leave the crown out of commerce. Here it was, printed in black ink. The whispers started immediately. Some called it a misunderstanding. Others called it deliberate. Inside those marble corridors, it didn't matter which version was true. Perception was enough. To the chosen ones protecting the monarchy's image, it looked like the couple had crossed the final line. For King Charles, that paper represented more than a technical breach. It symbolized something deeper, the fear that royal dignity had become a commodity. He could live with criticism, even rebellion, but turning the family name into a brand, that was unforgivable. Complicating matters further were murmurs coming from Westminster. Members of Parliament had begun discussing what they called the Royal Titles Reform Bill, a potential law that would allow the government to strip inactive royals of their titles. To the palace, that was the ultimate humiliation. Imagine politicians, not monarchs, deciding who could call themselves royal. Charles couldn't let that happen. So when the report reached him, the decision almost made itself. Either he took control now, or Parliament would take it for him. It was no longer just about two individuals in California. It was about the survival of monarchy itself. The king's advisors prepared the documents in silence. One senior official later described the mood as surgical, emotionless, clinical, inevitable. When Charles finally looked at the papers, he didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then, he gave the smallest nod, as if conceding to destiny rather than choosing it. From that point, events moved quickly. The Palace Communications Office was told to make no statement. The web team scheduled a midnight update. Even William, who had been urging his father to act for months, said little. Everyone understood what was happening. History was being rewritten in real time. And yet, as efficient as it seemed, the decision carried a personal cost. Because behind the royal signatures and digital updates was a father realizing that every act of duty came with a wound. Charles had defended his sons for decades. Now he was defending the crown from one of them. But this wasn't only his decision. It never had been. As the last approvals crossed the desk, another influence hovered just behind the throne. The steady voice that had been pushing for change long before the crisis hit full speed. Charles was never meant to rule this way. When he finally ascended the throne, he hoped for a quiet reign, one of unity, modernity, and measured calm. Instead, he found himself standing at the crossroads between fatherhood and monarchy, torn in two directions that refused to meet. For weeks before the titles were removed, he wrestled with the decision. To the public, the king appeared composed, but insiders described him as exhausted, thinner, more withdrawn. The tension had taken its toll. Late nights in the study, long phone calls that went nowhere, private notes filled with questions only he could answer. Every memory of Harry as a boy haunted him. The laughter in the gardens at Highgrove, the photographs from family trips, the small hand clutching his during parades. Now, those memories collided with press clippings, an endless commentary about betrayal. He was watching his family history turn into tabloid fuel, and he hated it. Still, duty loomed larger than nostalgia. Advisors reminded him of his coronation oath, of the promise to protect the institution above all else. "You are not just a father," one aide reportedly said. "You are the crown." Those words landed hard. Charles had spent a lifetime waiting for that crown, but he never imagined it would cost him this much. In the quiet of his private office, he reviewed the paperwork again and again. One night, an assistant entered to find him staring at the signature line, motionless. Finally, he whispered, "He's my son, but I'm the king." Then he signed. That single moment became the emotional heartbeat of the entire saga, the image of a monarch surrendering his heart to his crown. The chosen ones around him, his closest advisors, private secretaries, and of course, William, said nothing. They understood that Silas was the only mercy they could offer. Yet beneath the calm surface, the machinery of royal politics was moving fast. William had already positioned himself as the practical strategist, arguing that the monarchy could not afford another scandal. For Charles, that made the decision slightly easier, but not less painful. A father gives life. A king protects legacy. In that instant, those roles collided, and one had to die so the other could live. After the decision, the palace atmosphere changed. Staff described a mixture of relief and unease. The king became quieter, spending long hours alone. There were no celebrations, no back-patting briefings, just a collective awareness that something irreversible had been done. Outside, the public interpreted the move as strength. Inside, it felt like loss. Even William, the architect behind much of the pressure, knew his father's silence meant pain. Still, he believed it was necessary. For him, this was not cruelty, it was survival. And while Charles tried to steady himself for the backlash, he didn't yet realize that the next act of this drama would reveal something unexpected. A glimpse of ambition from within his own bloodline that would quietly redefine who truly held power inside Buckingham Palace. When the decision went public, the world's attention turned to King Charles. But inside the palace, the quietest figure was also the most decisive one, Prince William. For years, William had been cast as the steady heir, calm, private, unwilling to play the press game. Yet those who knew him best understood something deeper. William had learned from every headline his brother created. Each controversy became a lesson in how not to rule. He watched as Harry and Meghan's interviews, documentaries, and memoirs reshaped the public's perception of the monarchy. Each time, the palace scrambled to contain the fallout. But William didn't scramble. He studied. While others reacted emotionally, he treated every headline as a strategic puzzle. So when whispers about titles reform began to grow louder, William saw not just but an opportunity, a chance to show the world that the monarchy could act decisively, even in the face of family pain. And that's when the shift began. Courtiers noticed William spending longer hours with senior staff. Meetings that once included the king's old circle now featured the prince's advisors. Younger, sharper, less sentimental. They didn't speak in ifs or maybes. They spoke in timelines. It was William's team that reportedly drafted the internal proposal. A quiet administrative way to remove the Duke and Duchess titles without drama, without speeches, Just a midnight website update and a new phrasing on the royal roster. Clean, controlled, final. Charles hesitated, but William didn't. He knew the monarchy couldn't afford to look weak. The longer his father waited, the more power leaked away to social media narratives, to podcasts and tabloids. So he pressed gently but firmly. When the paperwork was ready and the signatures were complete, it was William who advised silence. "Let them discover it," he allegedly said. "It'll hit harder that way." The next morning, when the world woke up to find Harry and Meghan's titles missing, Buckingham Palace released no statement. No quotes, no denials, no explanations. Just one quiet edit. A digital erasure, centuries in the making. Reporters called it cold. Insiders called it necessary. But to William, it was something else entirely. A message. Not to his brother, but to the British public. A signal that the next generation of monarchy would not hesitate when duty called. Still, for all his precision, William remained human. Friends say he didn't celebrate that day. He simply went home, had dinner with his children, and went silent for the evening. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the weight of knowing that the crown he would one day wear was built on sacrifices only a royal could understand. And as the headlines raged outside, one figure across the ocean, watching every update from Montecito, realized that this wasn't just a story about power anymore. It was about consequences catching up. In Montecito, California, the sun was setting when the news hit the phones. It started as a push notification, then a flurry of alerts. Royal titles removed. Palace erases Duke and Duchess. Within minutes, the quiet calm of their mansion turned into a whirlwind of disbelief. For Harry, it wasn't just a royal update. It was the final echo of a life he'd already tried to leave behind. But hearing it, seeing it officially written, it still hurt. This wasn't exile anymore. This was erasure. Meghan, ever the strategist, was the first to regain composure. Friends say she immediately began drafting statements, weighing words, crafting tone. Should they respond, ignore it, reclaim the narrative? Every move mattered now, because silence could be seen as defeat, and defiance could be twisted into arrogance. Harry, on the other hand, sat in silence. Those who know him describe that night as one of reflection, anger, sadness, confusion, all blending together. He'd spent years fighting for freedom, but freedom had come at the price of identity. The name that once opened doors now symbolized the very thing he'd lost. Calls came from friends, journalists, even family members who still spoke privately. Some urged restraint. Others advised retaliation. But Harry wasn't sure what either meant anymore. Was there even a family to fight for now? Meanwhile, across social media, opinion was split. Some users praised the king for acting decisively. Others accused the monarchy of cruelty. The debate spread fast. Hashtags, videos, reaction channels. Every corner of the internet weighing in on a centuries-old feud that had somehow gone digital. By midnight in California, the palace's silence became its loudest weapon. Every unanswered question only fueled curiosity. Every missing statement only deepened speculation. And the couple knew that, this time, they couldn't control the narrative. Still, if there was one thing Meghan had mastered, it was transformation. By the next morning, her team had already pivoted. "If they take away the titles," she reportedly told a close friend, "we'll build our own." That single sentence became the foundation of a new plan, a brand not built on royalty, but on reinvention. As cameras and microphones gathered outside, Harry remained quiet. He looked out over the garden, the same place he'd once filmed interviews about truth and healing, and realized that the story had come full circle. The family he'd walked away from had finally closed the door. Yet beneath that finality, something shifted. The palace might have taken his titles, but it hadn't taken his story. And that, perhaps, was what frightened them most. Because now, Harry and Meghan could speak without royal restraint, and their next move would determine whether this was an ending or the start of a louder, more dangerous chapter. The noise outside the palace walls was growing louder, not from journalists this time, but from politicians. As the monarchy tried to maintain its silence, whispers inside Parliament began to turn into something more serious: a formal review of royal titles. It started as a small discussion, a single MP raising the question of whether royal privileges should still extend to those who no longer serve the crown. But like all things involving the monarchy, one sentence became a headline, and one headline became a movement. Within weeks, news programs across Britain were debating a single question: should the titles of the Sussexes and others be stripped by law? For the royal family, this was dangerous ground. The monarchy thrived on the illusion of separation from politics, above government, beyond legislation. But now, that fragile wall was cracking. If Parliament stepped in, it wouldn't just be about Harry and Meghan. It would set a precedent that even the chosen ones of the royal bloodline could face the same scrutiny as any other public figure. Behind closed doors, Charles's advisors scrambled. Legal teams studied the potential fallout. If the royal titles reform bill passed, it wouldn't just limit the monarchy's control, it would expose its internal decisions to the public eye. That kind of transparency was a nightmare for an institution built on secrecy and ceremony. And yet, there was irony in the timing. The palace had acted swiftly to remove Harry and Meghan's titles from its website precisely to avoid parliamentary involvement. But that act, that quiet, calculated erasure, had only drawn more attention. By trying to appear in control, the monarchy had stirred the very debate it hoped to silence. Meanwhile, public sentiment was shifting. Younger generations, already skeptical of the monarchy, began questioning the purpose of inherited privilege. Online discussions turned to accountability, to fairness, to whether being royal still meant being untouchable. For some, this was history correcting itself. For others, it was the slow dismantling of tradition. Within the palace, William once again took the long view. He understood that the monarchy had survived not through resistance, but through adaptation. Each crisis had been met not with denial, but with reinvention. And so, while the media speculated about political reform, he worked quietly to modernize the family's image, to make the monarchy look less like a dynasty and more like a duty. Still, the sense of unease lingered. Every discussion, every motion in Parliament reminded the palace that their authority rested not just on lineage, but on perception. For centuries, the crown had stood as a symbol of divine right. But now, it was facing something far more powerful than any royal decree: public opinion. And as the House of Commons murmured about reform and justice, Buckingham Palace prepared for what would come next. A new era where even kings had to answer questions. Because in this modern Britain, the chosen ones weren't just born into power. They had to earn the right to keep it. By the time the noise faded, something had changed. Not just in the headlines, but in the heartbeat of the monarchy itself. King Charles had made his move. The titles were gone. The family had fractured beyond repair. Yet somehow, the institution stood taller. It was leaner now, colder perhaps, but undeniably stronger. The chaos that once surrounded the royal image had been contained, at least for the moment. Inside the palace, the mood was quiet. No celebrations, no public declarations. Just a steady, almost eerie calm. Charles, exhausted by months of pressure and doubt, reportedly told a close aide, "This wasn't about punishment, it was about preservation." That word, preservation, became the defining tone of his reign. The monarchy had weathered divorces, scandals, and deaths, but this was something new. A public reckoning in an age where secrets no longer stayed hidden. For Harry and Meghan, the silence was louder than any speech. They had built their lives on speaking their truth. Now, they were forced to live with the world's interpretation of it. Yet, even stripped of their royal labels, they remained figures of fascination. Their freedom came with both power and isolation. And while the palace door stayed shut, the world kept watching. Some saw Charles's decision as courage, a rare moment of discipline in an age of chaos. Others saw cruelty, a father turning his crown into a wall. But the truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. Because this wasn't a story of villains and victims, it was the story of an ancient family trying to survive in a digital age, an institution trying to stay sacred when everyone demanded transparency. Still, among the gilded halls and the cold marble of Buckingham, one truth lingered unspoken. Every royal choice comes with a human cost. For Charles, that cost was his son. For William, it was the quiet acceptance that his generation would inherit not just a crown, but a family divided. Yet through it all, the monarchy did what it always had. It adapted. The chosen ones within its walls had rewritten the rules, proving that survival often demands sacrifice. And so, when the dust settled, the crown gleamed not because it was untarnished, but because it had endured. The story of Harry and Meghan would continue to ripple through documentaries, interviews, and memoirs. But inside Britain's most guarded walls, the message was clear. The monarchy bends, but it does not break. In the end, every act of defiance, every headline, every rumor led to this single moment, the quiet, inevitable correction of history. As the camera fades on this chapter, the question remains, did King Charles save the monarchy, or did he simply delay the inevitable? Let the debate begin. Drop your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next one. The scandal.